I believe that the Washington Mystics hold the keys to 2024 WNBA free agency. I believe they hold the keys to that bus, convertible, or whatever vehicle of your choice. But to discuss it all, I have Jenn Hatfield, Mystics extraordinaire, with me to break that belief down. The Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast, it starts right now.
Ogunbowale for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Hi and welcome. You are locked on to women's basketball. I'm Jackie Powell. I'm one of your typically on Fridays hosts. I cover the New York Liberty at the Next, and I've covered women's basketball nationally at many other places. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And remember that Locked On Women's Basketball is brought to you by everyone at the Next, including my guest, Jenn Hatfield. It is a place where we cover women's basketball all the time, and we tell the stories that need to be told every day. Subscribe now to support our staff that works oh so hard. It is $9 a month or $72 for the year. Remember that Locked On Women's Basketball is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many more. This show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Anyway, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. So the last time you and I were here, dear listener, on Friday, I had the great Alex Simon here, and we spoke about our bold women's basketball predictions for 2024. And so I just want to flash back for a moment. The Mystics are going to look very different in 2024. I happen to believe that either one of Natasha Cloud or Elena Delle Donne won't be in Washington in 2024. Who knows? Maybe both of them won't be on the Mystics in 2024. So all of that was before the reporting that came out in Jenn's Mystic free agency preview that according to two league sources, Elena Delle Donne is expected to move to another team this offseason. So Jenn, we have a ton to unpack here. In segment one, we're going to talk about what's to come for Elena Delle Donne, as she was officially cored on January 13th. Then in segment two, we'll talk about the Robin to Delle Donne's Batman, Natasha Cloud. What could happen for her in free agency? And then finally, Jenn and I are going to take a look at what type of team the Mystics want to be moving forward. Is their place in the WNBA pecking order going to change or stay the same? So let's get to it, Jenn. I am so glad that you are here. So let's start with it. Is Elena Delle gone?
We shall certainly see, right? I mean, the core offer gives the Mystics control, for lack of a better word, over her future, but that could take a lot of different forms, and there's no guarantee she stays under team control in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we know about some pretty infamous sign-in trades when players were cored. Obviously, the Tina Charles trade from 2020, I believe. And then you had the Skylar Diggins-Smith trade, which I also believe was 2020. So 4 years later, I think we're maybe due for another one of those. So I guess before we get into potential landing spots for EDD, I guess I just want the listeners to try to understand, I guess, why you think it was smart to core EDD and what the decision of coring her rather than another player means.
Sure. So first, shout out to our friends at Her Hoop Stats for their CBA FAQ, which really helps us out with all these things. But just for listeners who may not be aware, so coring is a mechanism where a team can make an offer, a 1-year guaranteed supermax offer to a pending free agent. So usually this is an unrestricted free agent, like an Elena Delle Donne. And then no other team can negotiate directly with her to sign a contract. So the Mystics get exclusive negotiating rights in exchange for offering this rather lucrative guaranteed contract. So they essentially get to make her, instead of an unrestricted free agent, she is now closer to a restricted free agent. And so what that means is if she does not want to, you can often use the core if a player is thinking about moving on and you either want to keep them in your market, or if that's not possible, you can at least get some sort of return, because now for Elena Delle Donne to go elsewhere, she needs to be signed to a contract by the Mystics and then flipped in a trade to go elsewhere. So instead of, if she's an unrestricted free agent, you don't core her and she goes somewhere else, you don't get anything in return. You just lose Elena Delle Donne. Now by coring her, if she wants to go elsewhere, there has to be a return that the Mystics are willing to accept. So that's kind of the backroom thinking there. So, and just in terms of who to core, it can be multiple factors can go into it. It can be, who are you most afraid of losing? It can be, who do you think is worth a supermax contract, which is, it's roughly 240 some odd dollars. And it's going to make a dent in your salary cap if the player accepts it and you need to pay them. So you don't want to offer someone, you don't want to core someone if you don't think that they are worth a supermax, just in case. So
there are a bunch of spots for Elena Delle Donne to go. And the reason that is because what we've learned about this league, or at least what I've learned, and Jen, maybe you've learned it too, is that power forwards tend to run this league. So Elena is very valuable, incredibly valuable. So I was thinking about the Atlanta Dream. And the reason I was thinking about the Atlanta Dream is they need to take a step forward, and they need someone who can score from the 4 spot reliably. But Jen, off air, you and I discussed that might not be the spot for EDD. Why do you think that?
Yeah, so, the last we heard from Delle Donne was the day after the season ended. So she wasn't, really in a place to think about free agency super in depth, but she talked about her priorities, and she made it clear that her top priority is winning. She said, quote, "I just want to win, so that's truly what I care about most." So there's that. And then there's also the family aspect, which motivated her forcing a trade from Chicago, where she was drafted, to the Mystics back in 2017, specifically her older sister, Lizzie, in Delaware. So family's been something that's been important to her whole career. So if you're looking at winning and you're looking at family, Atlanta's going to take her farther away from Delaware. And you could argue that it's maybe about a wash with Washington in terms of, ceiling or championship potential. So there just may not be the upside for her to want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, Atlanta they are still in their rebuild process. They're not in the lottery anymore, but they're not contending right now. They're not in the top tier. They're still in the middle tier. So I see that.
And we should mention she's 34 years old.
Yes, absolutely. And that's important.
Short term, she's looking for a short-term championship window.
So, continuing with being alphabetical, the Connecticut Sun. This is a spot that I feel like would make a lot of sense for both parties. We had a quote from Jacqueline LeBlanc's free agency preview, which this was from GM Darius Taylor of the Connecticut Sun. He said, Quote, I think our team and organization, or with our team and organization, she would be great. I don't know if she would go too far from home, but we're not far.
Sure.
Eyeball emoji.
I like the Connecticut Sun as a destination, pending what they do with their unrestricted free agents. I think if you re-sign DeWanna Bonner and you re-sign Brianna Jones, and you also have Alyssa Thomas in the mix, how is that rotation going to look? How are you going to be able to fit everybody in that front court? So I have some questions about how that all shakes out, but that seems like something that is Stephanie White's problem, potentially. So I don't hate that spot. I think it could serve both of her goals.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We are going to take a quick break, but when we get back in segment 2, we're going to finish up talking about some landing spots for Elena Delle Donne and Natasha Cloud. And I'm going to tell you, some of these overlap. But first, let us talk about our friends at eBay Motors. So our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you with the players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So let's see who Josh picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Pick of the Week. The recently traded Emmanuel Quickley. If Quickley is still available in your league, he is a guy to add. Even if he doesn't start immediately, I expect he gets a big bump in minutes in Toronto. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team and is all about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. My car once needed a new alternator, and I learned what an alternator was. And eBay Motors was a huge help. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack, bumpers, whatever your car or vehicle of choice needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Well, thank you, eBay Motors. Yes, I learned about an alternator. It is quite a part. And so we are back to talk about some of these free agency destinations for Elena Delle Donne and Natasha Cloud. And then we will also discuss, why Natasha Cloud's situation is a little bit different. But so some other spots for Natasha Cloud, for Elena Delle Donne, which are shared by Natasha Cloud, in which we could both sort of see, are the Minnesota Lynx, the Phoenix Mercury. I know it sounds wild, but there's an explanation. And the Seattle Storm. So Jen, break down why the Minnesota Lynx might fit for both Elena Delle Donne and Natasha Cloud.
Yeah, I mean, from Elena's point of view, maybe she likes what Minnesota's building, wants to play for Cheryl Reeve. I could see her buying into their vision of contention. And then, it is farther from Delaware, but her wife Amanda does have Midwest ties. Went to college at Illinois State, has family in the area, grew up in the Midwest. So, especially since this figures to be probably a 1 or 2 year contract, maybe it is time for them to move closer to her wife's family for a bit. So maybe that does fit the definition of family that she shared as a priority. So I could see that going, and for Natasha Cloud, it could be pretty similar, honestly, with the wanting to contend point, who doesn't want to play with Nafisa Collier. So, that could be a landing spot. I have trouble seeing Natasha Cloud anywhere outside of DC. So it is hard for me to see that vision, but that's not a knock on Minnesota. That is just the reality that Natasha Cloud has been in DC since she was drafted in 2015 and is as important as any sports figure over that span to the city. So she is DC.
Yeah, I mean, Minnesota is really interesting because they have some young talent that the Mystics could be really interested in if Elena does want to go there. There are a lot of assets. They have a lot of young players. I mean, would Cheryl Reeve trade a Diamond Miller or a Dorka Juhas for Elena Delle Donne? I don't know, but they have some assets. Anyway, onto a team with a little bit less assets, the Phoenix Mercury. So the reason why I think the Phoenix Mercury could sort of be dark horses in free agency, especially with these two, is because of Kristi Tolliver, their new associate head coach. And Jen, you can speak to this more than I can about the relationship that Tolliver has with Elena Delle Donne and Natasha Cloud. But before I let you do that, the Mercury are going to have a new facility. And they have a new owner who is willing to invest and make players as comfortable as they want to be. And I think that can be very attractive. But Jen, how do you think Tolliver might serve as someone who can attract players, especially former teammates?
I can't overemphasize how good of a relationship Tolliver has with both of those players. I'm just wondering if it's enough to overcome the distance for both players. We talked about Elena's family ties. Natasha Cloud's from the Philadelphia area. So I have trouble seeing either of them really anywhere out west. But you do make a good point that Tolliver has very strong bonds with both of them. You could see that this season when Tolliver came back to the Mystics. It was just so obvious when she came back, when she played super well in her debut, and unfortunately when she tore her ACL late in the season. So that bond is there. I just don't know if it is enough to pull them that far from family.
That's a good question. That's one that we currently don't have the answer to, but we'll know soon. And that same argument goes for the Seattle Storm. And the reason I sort of put them on here for both of them is you think about what Seattle needs. They need scoring from the power forward position, and they need a lead guard to complement Jewel Lloyd. And they need someone who can play defense well, especially from that spot. And we all know about how well Natasha Cloud can play defense. But Seattle is not in a winning window right now. At least we don't think they are, right?
Right. I think there would need to be some corresponding moves to get Seattle closer to contention. They would need to probably have a big free agency in other ways than these signings to convince them to go out there. That would be my guess. I wouldn't put them high on my list right now for either player.
Absolutely. So, Jen, do you have any teams for these two that I'm missing or that we've missed in talking about both Elena Delle Donne and Natasha Cloud?
Yeah, I wouldn't discount the possibility of Cloud returning to DC in particular. I think odds are decent that they can re-sign her, especially with it looking like Delle Donne is going to be out the door, and then maybe the money piece for Cloud, you can pay her a little bit more than if you were trying to manage both players. But on the flip side, you probably also want to sign someone really good to replace Delle Donne. So we'll see how the money shakes out. But I could definitely see Cloud returning to DC. For Delle Donne, another place that's still close to home on the East Coast is the New York Liberty, and we can talk about whether New York has an appetite for that, but they do have some unrestricted free agents, and we could just core a couple players, swap them back and forth. I'm looking at Jonquel Jones here if she wants to try a new destination. That could be as simple as a 1-for-1. That could throw in some other pieces. We could have a giant trade, but I think it would be something that Mike Thibault should at least call to explore. I'll put it that way. I think that would be much easier to sell Delle Donne on if the Liberty are interested than saying, oh, I really like the assets that Seattle can give me, and trying to convince Delle Donne to go clear across the country to play for a team that is not contending. I mean, the Liberty are this super team, and I feel like that would be pretty perfect for Delle Donne as one of the two super teams and by far the closest one. So, we'd have to see how it shook out from the Liberty side, but it seems from the Mystics side, it seems an obvious target to engage with.
I don't know how do I put this? As the resident Liberty beat reporter, do I think the conversations are going to happen behind closed doors? Sure. But do I think it is going to happen? No. Because I know how hard the Liberty worked to get Jonquel Jones to come over in that trade, how much they have appreciated her game from afar. As I wrote in my preview, you can't core two players, and JJ has been cored to the, maximum amount she can be cored. But the Liberty's number one priority, now that they've cored Breanna Stewart, is they are going to try to do whatever it takes to get Jonquel Jones back in Seafoam and Black. So it definitely would add a lot of spice, because I think, Jen, you told me yourself or you reminded me that the first game of the season for both teams is
New York at Washington at the Entertainment and Sports Arena. So if Delle Donne ends up there, she comes straight back to DC for the season opener.
I don't think it's going to happen.
Potentially, what do you think? We didn't talk about this off air, but maybe Dallas has a certain very unicorny restricted free agent, and perhaps there could be a little swap involved regarding Delle Donne and Satu Sabali and perhaps some other assets to balance things out. Dallas seems to be on the upswing, possibly.
That could be really interesting. I mean, Greg Bibb has been known to engage in trades with Mike Tebow. And so Greg Bibb has come out on the record, and he has said that essentially he's going to try to do whatever it takes to make sure that Satu stays in a Wings uniform. But hey, I could see it. They need more veteran players. Again, I wonder how Elena would fit. I guess you could play her at the 3 instead of playing her at the 4.
You might run into some challenges defensively depending on who you're playing, but you could put her at the 3. Also, clearly what needs to happen here is that swap, and then New York needs to deal Nyara Sabali to DC so that both Sabali sisters are in DC.
Oh my God, Jen.
As the resident families beat reporter at the Next, I will accept this convoluted trade scenario.
So I would love that for you, and just for you, because you would write probably one of the best stories about pro siblings ever. I mean, you have. But anyway, before we go once again to take a quick break, I just want to remind our listeners why Natasha Cloud's situation is different from Elena Delle Donne's. So if you could explain that to your listeners.
She is an unrestricted free agent. She's not cored. She can go wherever she wants without the Mystics getting anything in return. It's much easier for her to leave. There doesn't have to be an agreement with the Mystics and all this signing and trading and stuff. She can walk.
Yep, that's the deal there. And which is why I sort of think, like, could these two be sort of a package deal? Is that possible? I wonder.
It's possible, but it's complicated, especially if they don't particularly want to take discounts, because then they are limited to only the teams that can afford them to pay their market value, which Natasha Cloud is arguably the top or one of the top point guards on the free agent market. She should be in high demand. Elena Delle Donne's upside is as high or higher than anyone in this league when she's healthy. So, they are both probably going to command a good deal of money. And then you also have to deal with the sign and trade part on Delle Donne's side. So it has to be a place that the Mystics feel like they are getting enough return for Delle Donne. So it's really all the pieces have to fit in the right spots for that to happen. So it could happen. It's going to be much harder than if they don't want to be a package deal.
Yeah, I mean, it's the opportunity cost that comes with winning, right? So it's like, okay, they both want to win. And that's what you saw with Brianna Stewart and Courtney Vandersloot. There were sacrifices made there. It depends. How much do these two want to sacrifice? Do they want to continue their journey together, or are they ready for something new individually? That's something that we are absolutely going to be looking at, which is why I say the Mystics hold the keys to this bus, to this free agency bus. But when we come back for our final segment, we're going to talk more about the Washington Mystics and sort of what their future looks like and where they may be in the WNBA pecking order. But first, I do want to talk to y'all about our friends at Prize Picks. And so, with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. An example, LeBron James and Travis Kelce, although is his name supposed to be Travis Kelce? I don't know. I saw something on Entertainment Tonight that maybe said that we've been saying his name wrong this whole time. But anyway, those two had a combo of 10.5 3 points made and receptions. Do you want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Prize Picks also offers this really convenient reboot policy that your entries stay in place even if one of your players gets injured. Wow, the Washington Mystics would have benefited from that in 2023. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. And hey, as a pop culture nerd, I find it really cool to play alongside musicians and comedians. I mean, these are people too, just like us, who love sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Okay, thank you, Prize Picks. And we are back talking now about the Washington Mystics. We've been there, done that with Elena Delle Donne and Natasha Cloud, 2 franchise stalwarts. But let's talk about the Mystics themselves, besides those 2. So, Jen, I'm going to pose this question to you. Do the Washington Mystics take this opportunity to reset and rebuild?
So it depends, which I know is a giant cop-out, but I think that a lot would have to go wrong for them to hit the rebuild button right now. I don't think they're there quite yet. If let's assume they lose Elena Delle Donne, because that appears to be the case, they'll bring in some other pieces that will presumably be helpful to them, whether picks or players. But if they re-sign Natasha Cloud, let me just read some names that they'll have under contract for 2024. Natasha Cloud, Ariel Atkins, Brittany Sykes, Shakira Austin, Maisha Hines-Allen, Shatori Walker-Kimbrough, Queen Egbo. This is a good roster, and they would still have plenty of cap space with Delle Donne off the books to go sign an elite free agent to round that out. So Well, there are plenty of them. I could read the whole list: Jonquil Jones, Neko Nwumike, Brianna Stewart. Some of these, there are plenty more, but some of these are more likely than others. But there are free agents who are stars on the market that they could go get. And Washington has shown itself to be a place that lots of players want to play. Look at Brittany Sykes coming in last year. So if they bring in a star and they re-sign Natasha Cloud and they get some assets back from shipping out Elena Delle Donne, this is a very comparable roster to last season, which before they had the top most injuries in the league, they were looked at the beginning of the season as a dark horse championship contender. So like it would be a big mindset shift to hit the sell button, particularly when you've got Atkins and Sykes and Hines Allen and Walker Kimbrough and potentially Lee Mung, whose rights they hold in their primes age-wise. Like this would be the time to arguably, see how far they could go rather than trying to build further. Now, if they can't sign Natasha Cloud, if they can't land a big free agent, maybe you hit the reset button but then if you're going to reset, I would think you would want to start shipping off some of this roster too for more picks or younger assets. I'm not sure you keep this core and say we're rebuilding, because this is a pretty solid core they've got here. So it really depends, what they feel like they can accomplish in free agency and what they ultimately do accomplish, which way they go.
I also think it's you lay out all the points in such an eloquent way, but I also think it's about their goals. And so they've said for years, since 2019, and obviously we can't predict a global pandemic, we can't predict the injuries, but they said that they were in win now mode. And that was almost 5 years ago at this point. So if they want to just continue being a playoff team, being maybe a 5 to 8 seed for the next few years, I think it's feasible. If they want to win another championship, I don't know how they do that with the current core. I don't know how they do that if they cannot get someone who has a little bit more offense in them. And so that's why my take is yes, now is the time to reset and rebuild. You've seen successful rebuilds from the New York Liberty, could argue the Las Vegas Aces. The Indiana Fever is another one that we're seeing trend up. Same with the Atlanta Dream. And the reason I say this is because right now, in this draft in 2024 and in 2025, there are going to be some of the most talented young players coming into the league. Eric Thibault and his staff are some of the best player developers in this league. I think that is a fair comment to make. Do you agree?
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think when you bring talents in, they are going to find a way to elevate them, to elevate these, really young players into something more.
I'm not against your strategy. I'm more saying I'm not sure the front office is thinking that way, because they have been trying to seize this window for a long time. And it really depends. And Mike Thibault talked about this a little bit too in his exit interview. It really depends how you evaluate last season. Like, do you think that if the Mystics were healthy, they were good enough to be where the Mystics want to be, championship contenders? Do you think they could have knocked off the Liberty? And Mike Thibault was like, this is really hard to say because we only had our roster together for like a week before injuries, hit the whole thing. So I think the words he used was it's a little bit of a gray area right here. So it's really hard to evaluate the upside of that team when not only did they not play a lot of games fully healthy, but they didn't even practice a lot healthy. So it's my guess is that the front office is still bullish on this, kind of as reflected with Eric Thibault's quote. We have a lot of assets here. We can do this. We don't, he talked briefly about at some point late in the season or in his exit interview, I don't quite remember, he was asked about New York and Vegas, and he said, I don't really want to speak too long on other teams, but his basic point was, look at how Vegas rebuilt. They had 3 number 1 picks in a row. We don't want to be that bad for that long. Like, we don't want to do that. So, I don't think they're looking at this as this is going to be a long rebuild along the lines of like the Indiana Fever or the Las Vegas Aces. Like, I think they're looking at this more as a retool moment rather than a rebuild.
And we will have to see. And thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. I want to give a huge thank you to the one and only Jenn Hatfield for hopping on the show today. You and I are good sparring partners. I had a lot of fun. Jenn, where should people find you and your work? Not just the Mystics, but the Ivy League too.
And families, maybe more to come on that.
Yes.
You can of course find me and Jackie and all of our other writers at thenexthoops.com. You can find The Next on all of your favorite social platforms. I'm also on Twitter at Jenn Hatfield 1 on Twitter, or X if we're calling it that. But yeah, thank you all for subscribing and listening. And Threads at J Hatfield 1. So yeah, find us, keep following us. Thanks for listening.
Also, remember, Locked On has launched its first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you, covering 24/7 top sports stories of the day with our local experts on Locked On, plus national shows that cover every league. Next time we're together, dear listeners, we'll have some new WNBA contracts to break down, and I cannot wait for it. This has been Jackie Powell.
And Jenn Hatfield.
And we are signing off. Have a great weekend.
Ogunbowale for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball,